We're taking a look back at the best of 2016 on today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I am your host, as always, Jason Heath. So glad to have you here. Feedback at contrabassconversations.com. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. And today's a different kind of episode. We're taking a look back at the best of 2016. So this is how this episode is going to go. I'm just going to talk a little bit about getting back into the podcast. This was really the year of rebooting the podcast in a serious way. Go through a few numbers. I love stats. I spend probably way too much time geeking out on stats. So I'm going to talk through a few of those, which I think will be pretty interesting for everybody. And then we're going to play a short 10, 20, 30-second clip from all of the guests I featured on the podcast in 2016. So we'll start with Paul Ellison, who was the first guest of the year, and we'll finish up with Tracy Friedlander, who had just put an episode out with. Now, this is kind of a sister episode to the 10-year anniversary episode that I'm also putting out. January 1st, 2017 is the 10-year anniversary of the podcast. So today is a look back at what happened in 2016, and the other episode is kind of a more global perspective. And I'd like to take a moment before we dive in here and thank our sponsor, D'Addario Strings, and let you know a little bit about their Zyx strings, which I've been using for the last few months. They've got great growl, great gut-like sound. They're synthetic strings. They come in medium and light gauge. They're made at the D'Addario String Factory in New York, made in the USA, and you can check them out through the link in our show notes. And also, you can fill out the D'Addario string giveaway survey, which you can find at contrabassconversations.com/strings. And I'd also like to thank Rob Anzalotti of Bass Capos for providing the hosting for Contrabass Conversations. And if you're looking to get an extension, implement an extension, Rob is the guy to talk to. These capos are adjustable. They open and close in a super cool way. And check them out at basscapos.com. So, looking back at 2016, to me, I've always had a project that on the burner. Some of these projects you've seen publicly, like the podcast or the blog. Some of these projects are not as public. I disappeared for several years. If you didn't know that, I did the podcast starting in 2007. Around 2010, I pretty much vanished. I didn't really vanish. I just went into other things, went into education, got into electronic music of all things, and have kind of come back around with some life changes. And we talk about that on the podcast in a fair amount of detail this year in 2016. So here I am back at it, and I decided if I was going to relaunch it, I was going to really relaunch it. And for me, I'm all about finding a way to scratch my own creative itch in a way that benefits others. So I almost think of it as like self-centered motivation. And that's totally what the podcast is. I get off the phone or off of Skype, or I wrap up a live interview with somebody, and I think that's the best way I could have spent that hour of my day. I just love doing this. I love the flexibility of the medium, the fluidity of the podcast medium. It's something that I really explored more this year, and I'm really enjoying wearing these multiple hats. You know, I'm a musician, I'm a bass player, I'm a host, I'm a tech guy, I'm a librarian, I'm a scholar, dreamer, explorer, I'm a synthesizer, whatever happy words you can think of. And I just love the flexibility and the creativity of all those different roles. So that's a little overview. Now, let's talk some stats. Like I said, 2016 was when I kicked it into high gear. So 125 total shows this year. That's an average of 2.4 podcasts a week. The number of minutes overall, I think it comes around 130 hours of content, something like that. So that's 5.5 days of podcasts. So if you're one of the people that has listened to everything I put out this year, you have listened for 5.5 days. That is a heavy statistic. I also started doing highlight episodes this year. I did a couple of experiments with that in the past, and John and I talk about that on the 10-year anniversary episode. But Radio Hour, which I'm probably going to rename to something else, and Winning the Audition are great examples from this year. So that the collective we have listened to almost, if I do this math right, can that be right? Almost 1 million hours of podcasts. Yeah, that's right. We are almost at 1 million hours that the collective we have listened to this podcast this year. That is a significant metric by any standard. So the number of listens in 2016, as of when I looked this up, which was a couple weeks ago when you're listening to this, I looked this up about December 13th, we were at 876,625 listens. We are almost certainly over 900,000 by the time you're listening to that just for year 2016. We're coming up on 2 million overall for the podcast. The average daily listens for the podcast in 2016, the average was 2,519. And that average grew over the years, so that might be a bit higher by the time you actually listen to this. Now, the last time I did one of these overview episodes like I'm doing today, where I take a clip from many, many, many guests over a period of time, besides winning the audition, that kind of thing, was episode 100. I did what I call Origins, where I took everybody's origin story. How did they start playing the bass? So that was the last time I really did exactly something like this. A couple more stats, and then we'll dive into the heart of the episode. The most downloaded episodes of 2016. Number 5 was Nicholas Walker. Number 4 was Lloyd Goldstein. Number 3 was Peter Tambroni. Peter was on the podcast twice this year. The latter episode was the most downloaded. Number 2 was Matthew McDonald of the Berlin Philharmonic. And coming in at number 1, my man, Georgi Chinchivsky. And that's awesome. So congratulations to all of you, as well as everybody else on the podcast. Now, the most shared podcast on Facebook, as of the time I looked this up a couple weeks ago, number 5 was Dennis Bergevin. Number 4 was Young Xiao Wei. Number 3 was Sandra Osland. Number 2 was Johnny Hamill. And number 1 was Ruben Rogers. We had some multiple appearances. Lauren Pierce was on the podcast twice this year. Peter Tambroni was on twice. And Justin Locke was on twice also. We also had some Bass Festival previews, ISB preview, the Prague Bass Festival Bass 2016 preview, and the Royal College of Music Bass Festival preview. And we'll be doing more of those going ahead in 2017. And we had several thematic weeks this year. We had Luthier Week, Gary Carr Week, A Passion for Teaching, Entrepreneur Week, a second week on teaching, and Memories from Prague. So those are some stats for the year. I like doing this kind of thing. I'll probably do this at the end of every year, just sort of sum up the year. So here we go. For the following chunk of the podcast, I'm skipping all of the solo shows, all the Jason-only shows. I'm skipping any rebroadcasts. I'm skipping any of the convention previews and the music episodes. So this is just a look back on the one-on-one conversations I've had during 2016. We will feature a short clip from each one of these guests. And we start with Paul Ellison describing why he's drawn to teaching.
When did you start teaching bass? Did you start when you were at Northwestern or before or after?
I did. I had actually started when I was an undergraduate. This is something I don't really have an explanation for. And to this day, I don't know where the passion comes from and where I go when it all starts. But I've always been drawn to even giving lessons away just for the privilege and the joy of teaching. I don't really have any more explanation than that, except that I know that I'm drawn to it and that I love doing it, and it's the human interaction with an opportunity to support something that somebody wants to do that they love as much as you do. And if there's a way to be supportive with that, then let's get on with it.
And it was so great to start with Paul to kick off the year because one of the most frequent topics this year, and we'll get into what they all are, the most frequent was Paul Ellison and just studying with him what he's like as a teacher. So it was great to set the stage with Paul. Next up was an episode with Lauren Pierce and Jeff Chalmers, how they both got started doing their thing online. And like I said, I later had Lauren on as her own guest for Entrepreneur Week in September. And Jeff and I have become friends and talk regularly, helping each other out in our mastermind group. Maybe just tell folks a little bit about your two sites. Maybe Jeff, start with this Discover Double Bass. How did it come about and that sort of thing?
Sure. Well, I'm a sort of professional freelancer over in the UK, Jason, and I tend to play mostly jazz and show music, that's my sort of background. And I also have a friend who runs a bass guitar website, which is really successful, called Scott's Bass Lessons. Yeah. And essentially, he kind of inspired me, as did a lot of other people, like your Andy Anderson videos that you shot. Do you remember in the basement that you did with Andy Anderson? I've watched those loads of times.
Yeah, those are pretty grungy by today's standard. I think I had my Canon Pixma 2-megapixel camera, and of course, I remember those.
Yeah, the information is great in those. So, I really enjoyed checking those out, and I could see that other people were doing cool things online. So, I just really wanted to kind of get involved and share some information about the double bass and try and make the whole online thing happen. So I've been doing it since 2013. It's been going great. And then myself and Lauren have been working together on a project more recently. That's basically it.
And then, Lauren, you've got a ton of stuff on your site. And again, it's the YouTube channel's so fleshed out and the performances are so professional, just in terms of the recording quality and multiple camera angles. And when did you get started with all that?
I started, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago. I can't even remember now. It kind of happened by accident with my performance videos where I was doing this competition and I think they needed us to have a video. And I can't remember if we had to put them on YouTube or if I just put them up there anyway. But I put my first 2 videos, which is the Grand Tango and the Prelude to the Fifth cello suite. Yeah. And I just kind of left them there and forgot about them for a while. And I kept getting these emails from YouTube, so-and-so commented on your video, so-and-so commented on your video, and I just would ignore it. And then one day I was like, I should check and see, what's going on. And I checked and each one had 10,000 views. And I thought, that's crazy. And then I got to thinking about it and I was like, this could be a really cool way for me to, get my performances out there. Because at the time I really didn't have an avenue for me to get to play or perform for people. So that's how that started. And I've been doing those performance videos for a while. And then about a year ago, I started doing lessons. And then, like Jeff said, we just recently started collaborating together.
Next, we had Mark Ramirez describing working out of the Fred Zimmerman Contemporary Concept of Bowing Technique book. And I ended up hanging out with Mark in Prague and seeing his recital. So great to start off the year with him and then wrap up the year with him in person.
So I started to ask Sean if, listen, can we do some Arco stuff? So the first thing he took out was the Zimmerman Contemporary Bowing Exercises,
There we go.
That red Bible book that every bass player in the world should have because it's a fantastic book. I mean, you can just screw your head up with that real quick, huh?
The A&E book.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean A&E, and just your hand is just in that shape for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Next, I had Indianapolis Symphony principal bassist Rufong Liu, and here she is talking about what she focuses on with her students.
Usually I want to make sure that the students to think about the basics of, for example, slur. If you play a slur on a string from one string to the next, how can you connect them seamlessly? How can you make them perfectly slurred as you can? Things like that, little things, so that you play what's on the page.
Right. Next up, we had Andy Ricidi of the Milwaukee Symphony and Northwestern University, and he's talking about studying with Paul Ellison, which again, it's a topic that came up again and again in my talks these years. And it just shows what an influence Paul's had on the next generation of bassists.
He still makes fun of me. Next question? No.
Yeah.
Because when I got there, I remember suddenly being aware of how much I was unaware of. So I got there and didn't speak for about a year.
Okay.
And I don't know if I think if he thought, oh my God, wait a minute, why is this guy here? He's not contributing anything.
Yeah.
But I was absorbing, just listening all to everything. It was suddenly like, okay, well, yes, I'm open to a lot of ideas, and whoa, there's a lot to think about and a lot flying at me.
And we finish up January with a conversation with Bruce Bransby of Indiana University. Here we are talking about common technical issues that Bruce sees with students.
Sometimes I find myself sitting in a room with someone who, when they go and play scales, they'll put down the first finger, they'll put down the fourth finger, and the other fingers are just flying in the air.
Yeah.
So I have exercises which I've come up with, and one is just fragments of scales, which are basically 4-note groups, which go up on one string. So there's always shifting to be done back and forth. For people who have those kind of finger problems, there's a chromatic version, so we try to get them to lay out the fingers and on the descending one, just peel them off one by one rather than juxtaposing fingers.
Yeah. We kick off February with an interview with Douglas Mapp, who's the current president of the International Society of Bassists, and we're talking about feast or famine in the world of freelancing.
I tell my students, feast or famine.
Yeah.
And when it's time for a feast, you have to be healthy enough and mentally stable enough that you can go 1, 2, like I've had stretches where I had 5 or 6 weeks without a day off.
Mm-hmm.
Getting in your car. Like I remember one of the groups I play in would do children's concerts for 3 days in a row in the mornings. And I would have gigs at night, and it was like 90 minutes there and 90 minutes back.
Yep.
So on the second day of getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, getting in your car for rush hour traffic to drive to Reading, PA, just like, man, I hope I make it,
Yeah.
And then, of course, trying to stay up when you're driving home from your gig 14 hours later.
Yeah, exactly. And, for students listening to this, what Douglas is describing, that is the life. That is the life and that's the life of a successful musician. I think
that's the good life. That's the good life.
That's the good life. Next up is our interview with Ian Hallis, one of my former students and the most recent addition to the lyric opera bass section. This kicked off a big theme for 2016, which was auditioning. It eventually led to my book, Winning the Audition, and this is an incredibly popular episode from this year. It's been referenced many times, and a big chunk of it was used for Winning the Audition as well. So Ian's talking about how auditions are a process, and again, this is the interview that kind of got my gears turning for the audition project this year.
Auditions are a process. It's so easy for us to just bank and dream on winning the first audition you ever take, and that does happen, and it's tremendous when it does, but for the majority of us, it's just not going to happen, and there's an element of experience that happens when you take 5, 10, 15, even 20 auditions, which some of my friends have done, and they're very successful. It just took them that amount to do it.
Next, I talked with Carlos Henriquez, who's famous for playing with Wynton Marsalis for all these years, and he's reflecting on what advice he'd give his 18-year-old self.
Wow. If I would go back to me at 18, I would tell myself to, I would tell myself to be patient. And not to, I would tell myself to be patient and to not worry about what's happening musically, and just to, learn music and to enjoy music and to ask as many questions as you can to all the elder musicians, because I was able to hang out with a lot of the older jazz musicians and Latin musicians who passed away, but I didn't get to ask them those right questions,
Mm-hmm. Next, we had Brent Edmondson. What a great guy. I've known him for years. So great to have him on the podcast. And he's talking about how to push yourself forward and how opportunities fall into your life.
I never thought that I was going to be able to do what I do now in school. I was, a very, very marginal student when I got to Temple University. And I think anybody there would be happy to tell you that. But I worked and I cultivated all the different skills that I had. And the same thing was true at Boston University. I was very, very close to not getting in. And just kind of climbed the ladder. And it's been that way with everything that I've done, to just try and push myself forward, and the opportunities fall into my lap.
We kick off the first thematic week of 2016 with Luthier Week and Sue Lipkins talking about how she discovered her bow-making path.
I didn't like auditions. I also was kind of unprepared for life outside of college, and so I had a series of jobs that I didn't like. I didn't even really want to take auditions. It was an odd situation. I did freelance a little bit, and I didn't like that either. And so I got offered a job at William Salco's shop as a salesperson, and I was already going to go back to school and become a New York City school teacher. I had my temporary license to substitute, and I had my plan. But then I got offered the job at Bill's, and I thought, okay, well, teaching is always going to be there. But working at a bowmaker shop, if he would teach me how to make bows after hours, that would be a really exciting idea.
Another episode from Luthier Week was with Nick Lloyd, talking about how there's so much going on in the world of bass right now and how player-driven all this is.
It's also got to be kind of an exciting time to be a luthier. It just seems like, especially in the world of bass, there's just so much going on and different models and experimentations in the form. It seems like it'd be really exciting.
It is. And it's the players that are really pushing the boundaries, and they're demanding, things out of the instrument tonally and physically. And then, of course, with travel, necks have to come off. So flying is easier. But it's always been that the players, especially with double bass, the players, demand, they're playing in thumb position. Well, now they're doing this, and they want a big sound out of a short string length, and it is very exciting. It's just a great time to be a luthier, and I really identify with a player, and I've been playing since I was a boy, and it's like if the bass doesn't feel right and sound right to me, I'm not going to let it go out of the shop.
Next up from the United Kingdom, George Martin of George and Thomas Martin basses. And I got a chance to catch up with Tom later on in the year. We'll get to that in a little bit. So George is describing the beautiful piece of property that the Martin shop sits on.
Okay, so the main property, or the main house, I suppose, it's all set in about 10 acres. I think sort of English countryside. We're located in Banbury, which is about an hour outside London, so it's very easy for clients who come in from London to get to us, etc. But away from that, we live in it's a tiny little, we call it a hamlet. It's I think actually it's basically a really small village that hasn't got a pub. So that's what we call it, a hamlet.
Okay.
So there's only 24 houses in our little area.
Next up is my interview with the great Ron Carter. And here he is talking about how he makes note choices and what informs those note choices.
I'm just curious, how did you get to that place musically where you were thinking that way, where you were making those decisions?
I think I was a little both. I was thinking that way and making the decisions as to how can this chord sound if I make the bass note different. And again, part of that process is knowing where those notes are located on the bass. And the quicker you find them at the time when you need them, the more effective the line can be and the more you can develop a thought pattern. I tell my students, if you're playing the first measure of a piece, you should already be looking at the third measure to make these three measures connected by a line, a story, a concept that makes a harmonic direction of the bass line lead to a specific, very important note based on the construction of your bass line. I never play one measure at a time. I'm always playing one measure and reading through the next 4 or 5. If I'm playing a song that I already know and I'm not worried about the changes, I'm playing the first measure trying to figure out how can I make the first ending sound different based on my notes that lead up to that first and second ending.
I also had a chance to sit down with 2 previous guests, Barry Green and Jeff Raditich, and here's a clip of Barry talking about his Anna's Promise, Anna's Gift project, and how the universality of the human experience inspired this.
The music and the communication and the energy that we feel when we connect with these cultures is the same, and that we are all the same. We all want to be happy. We all want to sing and dance and or be inspired in some way. And that was, for me, starting to touch on something that really was close to my work, but it wasn't the same thing, but it really had something that I had never had before in my concerts, because now people were moved in a different, for a different reason.
I also had Andy Anderson, my very first podcast guest, back this year. In a sense, he was playing the Monty Chardas with my orchestra. It was so great to have him do that. I totally miss conducting that orchestra. That's a big bummer moving to San Francisco. Totally miss those guys. Great kids. And these are practice clips that Andy made for me to play for my students. And then we'll play just the very opening of Chardas.
1, 2, 3, go.
I love it. Metronome and all. Super helpful. Played it for the students. They got a feel for it, and it just made rehearsal so much more helpful. So Andy also has a section where he speeds up as Chardas goes, and he sent me a recording of that, and that it actually features one of his sons clapping along to help out with the tempo. My students really got a kick out of it. I think you'll enjoy it too. So here's the acceleration section from Chardas with Andy and his son.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and.
So armed with this helpful info, we were able to rehearse and put it together with Andy, and it was a very successful performance. This is a live performance of my orchestra with Andy, probably about 1,300 people in the audience. It was a very cool performance, and here we go.
The end of February, beginning of March, we had our second thematic week, which was Gary Carr Week. And we start off with David Murray talking about Gary Carr's teaching style and the vomit exercises.
Pretty much everything was focused on the bow. Because, Gary was all about sound, bow control, sound. And, a lot of people treat vomit as a shifting exercise. Gary never really talked about that. He talked about the bow. Anything to do with the left hand, we talked about that after the fact, but he always talked about the bow control first. And vomit is still something I share with my students too. I mean, everything to do with the bow, balance of the bass, and of course the way you shift is affected by all of that as well.
I next spoke with Michael Klinghoffer about how Gary Carr taught vibrato.
He actually wanted me to find my own vibrato because I always felt that he has his unique vibrato, and every player, it's like a signature, the vibrato, it's kind of a signature, and I just couldn't imitate his vibrato. And when he came back from a tour and I kind of found something, that was the end of the discussion. He didn't mention it anymore. He just insisted that I find my own sound and I find my own vibrato. And I think that's the great thing about his teaching. Not imposing or forcing someone to do something, but actually forcing me to find my own voice.
We followed up Gary Carr Week with another week of thematic episodes. I called it A Passion for Teaching, and we featured Inez Wyrek. Here she is talking about the beauty of affecting a child's life with your teaching.
They should be exposed to all kinds of music. You never know. Not every one of your students is going to land a professional symphony gig, but they might be playing in a band anywhere. They might be playing in a small orchestra. They might be They might be just a more appreciative audience member. However it is that you touched their life, and it's important, and they remember how you managed them.
We then featured Galen McCormick, and here she is talking about how she learned how to work on an audition list.
I didn't get really good at this until I worked with Aaron White on how to really break my list up. And that was like way later in grad school, where I have a whole system now of what I do to practice that kind of stuff. But back then, at least it was, I know I need to work on these things. If I hate working on those things, I'm going to push them off, which I would never do now. Right. But, then it was like sort of the medium hard things, the things I loved, and then finally the things I hated.
Next up, Andres Martin. Here he is talking about the three minds, the creator mind, performer mind, and conductor mind. And I got a chance to be on the faculty of the Golden Gate Bass Camp with Andres this summer. Great to catch up with him. He's become a really good friend. Great guy, great composer.
Having the composer's mind started to complete me as a performer, because it's now I see like three dimensions of the musician. I see basically there are two that are performer and creator, and there's a third one, which is the conductor mind. So I thought I should discover all these dimensions to complete myself as a musician.
Another thing I've been trying to do this year is talk to the, for lack of a better word, older generation of bass players. And I was so thrilled to sit down with Bert Turetsky. Here he is telling some great Duke Ellington stories.
What Duke would do when somebody was screwing up and maybe drunk for a couple of days at a time, he'd introduce them to the audience, and he'd say, the great Cootie Williams. And Cootie had been drunk for 3 days, and he'd call a tune that they hadn't played for months, and there would be Cootie Williams walking to the front of the orchestra and being in charge of this tune, and that sobered him up pretty fast.
Yeah, I'll bet. Next up, my first round two of the year. Here I am talking with Ira Gold, one of my early guests, one of my most popular guests, and this is a clip covering how Ira approaches teaching.
When I'm working with people, I'm always trying to capture as much width and depth of the philosophy or pedagogy or musical style or crisis or challenge or difficulty of what's in front of us.
Next up, I talked with Chuck Israels about what, if anything, all the great jazz artists he's worked with had in common.
That's an interesting question. I have not thought about it in that way. I'm not sure I can come up with a quick answer.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's kind of a hard question.
Well, because in some ways, people think about music. Well, I said Ellington and Evans. Those are two people whose view of music was both deep and broad, and who were especially important to me. And working with Bill, there was an interest in how all of the music was functioning, not just how your solo went. And that was a critical point of view, a critical element to me. And that's also true of Ellington's music. It's not about how fancy a solo can you play. It's about how much of a story can you tell with everything that's going on with the music from the time it starts till the time the piece ends.
Next up, Adam Ben Ezra, the eclectic, brilliant bass player. Here he is talking about his compositional process.
Some of the tunes I compose on the bass, some of the tunes I compose on the piano. When it's a solo bass thing, usually I do it on the bass, of course. Usually I start to improvise and I get into a very interesting groove or melodic ideas,
And when I stumble it and I like it, I try to develop it into a complete tune.
I then got to sit down and talk with Peter Tambroni for a round 2, and later in the year, a round 3. He's my first round 3. So here's Peter talking about repetition with active engagement.
Repetition without brain involvement is you're wasting your time.
Right, or you're practicing and reinforcing the wrong thing.
Exactly.
Even worse, yeah.
So repetition with active engagement. Active engagement is what you want.
Yeah.
Next up, another one of my great Chicago friends, Trevor Jones. Here he is talking about the 2 paths he found himself staring down in his early 20s. And incidentally, I think I'd had a few drinks during this conversation, so just listen to my reaction. I sound pretty different than my usual self. I've usually had 3 or 4 cups of coffee when I do these interviews.
But yeah, those were the 2 paths, like stay in school, continuing with the orchestral stuff. But I just, I didn't have... When I hear other people on this podcast talk about that pursuit, I didn't have that type of fire to just hone in on that. I just didn't feel that.
Not that, but you wanted to do music. You wanted to, but the path wasn't clear.
Yeah, there are other things that there are other. I mean, everybody's into other things. I'm not trying to make excuses, but there were just. I just couldn't justify staying in school for 2 more years. I just wanted to get out and work.
Next up, Klaus Freudenstein. Here he is talking about catching student interest when they're really young. And I have such great memories of hanging out with Klaus in Prague this fall. Can't wait to see him again.
My intention is to catch them when they are 4 or 5. Mm-hmm. And that's a very big difference. Because the way of thinking, it changes in this age every 2 years. I mean, everyone who has anything to do with kids knows it. Mm-hmm. If you teach someone who is 5, is very different with another one who is 8 or 10. So the world and in which they are, in the world where they live, changes so quick in that time. So as a teacher, I also have to change quick.
Here's another round 2 with Guy Tune, another popular guest in the past. And here he is just summing up the Guy Tune philosophy.
The philosophy of Guy Tune, I mean, it will stay the same, which means discover new things, try to discover what is not teachable. Don't play bass, make music.
Here we are into May. I'm getting ready to move to San Francisco here, packing up my place, and I sat down to do my first duo interview with John Grillo in years and years. We're talking with Philadelphia Orchestra assistant principal bassist Joe Conyers. He's talking about how you need to love what you do.
For me to become a professional musician, first and foremost, you must love what you do.
Yeah.
And when I say love what you do, you kind of love what you do with everything that you have. Because when the road gets really tough and the road gets really rough, you are going to want to stop. And you're going to want to just throw in the towel.
One of the few non-bassists I featured on the podcast, but how could I not feature her? She's an honorary bassist, of course, Madeline Crouch, general manager of the ISB for so long, talking about the value of being well-rounded.
I think the best teachers are always the teachers who want their students to be well-rounded and have a life. Have a life. You know, Bert Turetsky always says that, you know, like have a life outside of music and do things, you know, have a real life, no matter how talented you are.
It gives you something to express. And
Exactly. Music is just, it's a way to have fun and express yourself and pretty incredible.
One of my most inspiring episodes this year, the episode that made me go out and run 5 miles right after getting off the phone. This is Leon Bosch and his hardcore practicing approach during touring. I think my question was something like, how do you get so much done?
For 20 years, I had a way of dealing with touring because, you know, the Academy spends 90% of its time traveling. It plays very little in London. If it's in London, it's either in the recording studio or 1 or 2 venues playing concerts, and they prefer not to play concerts in London because they lose money. So they tour the world. But I have a regime. We turn up every day in a new place, usually just after lunch, which means it's difficult to find a restaurant that's prepared to serve food, but my colleagues would all dash out as quickly as possible to the restaurant. And once they did that, I would walk to the hall, and I would get my bass out of the flight case or whatever it was transported in, and I would practice. And usually we would then have a short rehearsal before the concert, around about 4:30 or thereabouts. And I'm already there. And everybody just believes I go to the bus like everybody else to do the rehearsal. But I will have already have done at least a couple of hours practice. Then I do the rehearsal, we do the concert, and I go back to the hotel. Next morning, we're on a flight. We arrive in a new place, and exactly the same thing. I go to practice.
I got to sit down with Robin Kesselman, principal bassist of the Houston Symphony, another audition-themed episode. And this is Robin talking about how he ultimately benefited from taking a large amount of time away from his left arm. He had a left arm injury that took him out of commission for quite some time. So this is him talking about that experience.
I just tried to get really creative to feel like I was still making progress. Mm-hmm. And I feel like ultimately, and I think David's to the same too, when I was kind of coming back, I think it had actually a really large impact on my playing that time for the better in a lot of ways. And there was times I needed to get back at the instrument with the left hand, but I tried to explore more really fundamental building block components of my right hand, not just, doing like Zimmerman string crossings or something like that.
Right.
So I felt like the building blocks with which I was making my shapes were not always completely honest.
We wrap up May with an episode with another old friend, Jerry Fuller. I taught Jerry's son bass for years and years. I played gigs with Jerry forever. Never had him on the podcast. Was just about to move away from Chicago. Got him on. It was such a fantastic episode. And this is Jerry talking about how much more we're actually driven by our personality and temperament rather than our skill level.
All of us in the world ultimately are more driven by our personalities and temperament in terms of what we end up doing in the world for our work or our art than it is our skill level. I could have stayed on in a modern orchestra, but it wasn't congruent with and in alignment with my personality and temperament, which I was fascinated by trying new things.
We start off summer with Arnold Schnitzer, another episode that really got my gears turning. We talked about all sorts of things, bass-related and not. Arnold's talking about Mike Rowe and training for the jobs that actually exist.
I'm going to go off on a tangent, and you might be familiar with Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs.
Sure, yeah.
Sure. So he's got a whole blog thing going now about training people for the jobs that actually exist.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go way off base here and talk about for a minute that everyone is taught nowadays do really well in high school, do great on your SATs, go to college, which by the way is going to put you into insurmountable debt. Yeah, exactly. But let's not go there. And then get a posh office job somewhere or a supervisor job somewhere or a sales or whatever. The problem is that as technology kind of usurps so many types of occupations, we're training people, and this is right from Mike Rowe, we're training people for jobs that are going away and they're not coming back.
Next up, our most popular episode of 2016, Georgi Chinchivsky of the Malta Philharmonic, talking a little bit about Macedonian folk music.
Our folk music is really, really, really rich because originally the songs are the tonal part is based on modes.
Okay. Yeah.
So a lot of great jazz musicians actually come from that region. Macedonia, Bulgaria also is very strong on this. So it's quite there are some quite versatile musicians there.
Education was another big topic this year, and getting out of my orchestra director role, a lot of bittersweet thoughts on that. And I had several conversations about that experience. So here I am talking with Gabe Katz. Gabe's talking about how he found himself in South Africa playing after scouring through musical chairs online.
I started looking for some work, and I was auditioning, making it to the semifinals and here and there. And I started just scouring the internet. And I think at the time it was like when people started looking at musical chairs, that website.
Oh, yeah.
I started looking, I started sending my resume to pretty much every orchestra on there. I was just like, you know what, let's see what happens. And I heard back from this orchestra in South Africa in Durban called KZNPO. It's in Durban, South Africa. And they sent me like an email like, yeah, why don't you send us a tape, a DVD? If it works out, we'll fly you out round trip and you'll audition for the panel here and, have a trial.
Another audition-specific episode, I spoke with Brandon McLean, who had just won a spot in the Pittsburgh Symphony. And he's talking about the Don Green books and how he found them helpful in his audition process.
I've read the Don Green books that I find really, really helpful, just in terms of centering and things like that. There's still some of that I do at auditions. I'm not so disciplined about it now, just because I've done it quite a bit, so I sort of know what the routine is without having to think about the routine. But really, that first time when I was able to go into an audition and feel that relaxing of my muscles right before I played, and really feeling like my energy wasn't all over the place, but I could really sort of compact that energy somewhere in my core, was really helpful.
My last live interview in Chicago, just as I was taking off, was with Katie Ernst, great jazz artist, vocalist, and bassist, and she's talking about the benefits of singing for non-singers.
Do you encourage your students, your bass students, to sing?
Yeah. I really do.
Yeah.
Because, especially with jazz and when you're working with a young improviser, so much of it is getting them to, chill out and just play what they're hearing, or even be aware of what they hear in their head, so they're not just kind of panicked and playing random notes. And even in classical bass with getting intonation together, people will get so caught up in it, I'm doing the right fingering, that they're not really hearing and listening to the sounds that they're making. And when you sing them, you are usually a little bit more accurate.
Rounding out June, I had Nicholas Walker, president-elect for the International Society of Bassists. Here he is talking again about Paul Ellison, common theme this year, and his conversation with Paul about Nick's goals.
And I remember this conversation because this is he said, so what are your goals? And I said, well, I want to be a great bass player. And he said, well, you are a great bass player. What are your goals? And I think there was about 3 seconds where I was in my mind saying, he said I was a great bass player. He said I was a great bass player. Yahoo! But then I realized that great compared to what? That doesn't, so what? If I wanted to go, I don't know, maybe play a bluegrass gig or something, some really simple background show tune music or something, I would be just fine. I didn't have to go any farther. I didn't have to study. I didn't have to. So when he got me to think about what are my goals, where do I really want to go with music? What do I want to learn? What am I curious about? What matters to me?
Starting off July, a guy who's become a great friend, Lloyd Goldstein. Can't say enough good things about Lloyd. And this is Lloyd talking about the special way in which writing, composing for his job as a certified music practitioner has affected his outlook.
It's been unbelievable, incredible. All the repertoire I've created and all the writing I do, the arranging I do, and everything, it's geared towards that job, towards that work. And that's partly why I'm not embarrassed to write simple things, simple tunes, why I'm not trying to impress anyone with an enormous amount of technique, or because the music you play in a situation like that has to be it's there to serve the patient, not to serve you. Mm-hmm. I'm not performing, I'm giving a gift of music, let's say. And what I give needs to be, if it's difficult for me, if it's on the edge of my ability to play, it's inappropriate.
I got a chance to speak with David White, who's active in the Broadway scene. And this is another thing I started to do more in 2016, go down certain subgenres, I guess, that I hadn't explored in the past. Broadway playing, tango playing, we'll get into that later. So here's David White talking about networking.
Networking is difficult because it isn't rocket science, but at the same time it is. You know what I mean? You have to be there, you have to be present, but the thing that they don't teach you in music school is that you have to be a good guy. You have to be fun to hang out with, because people notice and they won't hire you if you're a jerk.
Next up, my conversation with Jory Herman of the San Diego Symphony, another Paul Ellison student, and here's a quote about lessons learned from Paul and actually living your life. I love this quote.
The other thing that I learned from Paul is that, it's not just about
developing your technique or developing a certain aspect of your bass playing. It's about developing you as an individual. So get out there, take a day off from the bass, go explore, go to the museums, have relationships and, failed relationships, and have a crazy time and, work hard, play hard sort of thing. It's like you have to, feed your soul as well as, all of those technical aspects of your playing, which a lot of people, whenever you think, oh, I have to get a job, I have to go play in this group, or I have to do this, I have to audition, and it can be paralyzing, right?
Here's another round 2 with Justin Locke with some great thoughts on education, favorite topic of the year. And this ties in really well with Arnold's clip.
Really, this Common Core training, these standardized test training, really teaches kids to be obedient to a pre-existing system.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
As opposed to practicing where here's the etude, go in that room and figure out how to do it.
Starting off August, Matthew McDonald of the Berlin Philharmonic, and here he is talking about how he learned to start a note correctly by doing lessons twice a week with a viola player.
A lot of lessons with a viola teacher, Gertrude Rosbacher, and basically just the principle of starting a note. We spent a month on that twice a week, just basically starting a note. Relaxing the arm and starting the note. And then I found once I had that under control, then it was a lot easier to get through the whole bow with constant contact and a constant sound.
Another legend of the bass world, Tom Martin. Here he is talking about how he got into the whole Bottesini thing.
Yeah, we used to practice in the afternoons and stuff and all this Bottesini music. And after a while, he said, you're getting good at this stuff. He said, why don't you record? Why don't we record some of this? And that started the recordings in the early 80s.
And I was just on a roll in August with the bass legends. Here's Terry Barbet, great guy, great player. Here he is talking about when he first met Francois Rabath, which is probably the second most popular topic on this year's set of shows, along with Paul Ellison.
I met Francois in my orchestra, in my opera orchestra. So first, I didn't met him because there is 2 teams in the orchestra and I was not in his team. But then I was in his team, and not only his team, but his stand. So I was playing with him a long time, 10 years, exactly with him on the same stand.
Sam Suggs, great artist, fascinating artist. Here he is talking about how he constructed a practice routine consisting of the elements of execution.
I made a list of every arpeggio in the Bottesini. The C major triplets, the D major triplets, the E minor triplets, and a D scale, a G scale. And I just had this kind of inventory of all of the things that required small muscle memory, so that depending on when my round was, I could, in 20, 25 minutes, hit all of the spots that I need to get back to that quick short muscle, whatever it's called, the short-term memory.
We rounded out August with an interview with tango bass legend Pablo Aslan. Here he is talking about how bass and piano fit together in traditional tango.
The basic orchestration starting in the 40s and to this day is to double the bass with the left hand on the piano. And so you're playing lines and it's being reinforced by the piano, and while you have you have a single attack and you sustain this from your left hand, they play very legato on the left hand. So that's where you get that boom, 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 boom.
Yeah. Next up, Christine Hook on understanding why you practice.
Before you practice, understand why you practice. Yeah. That's really hard. So, I was also young and didn't sing at all. So that's a hard thing, but it's very effective if you understand why you do this and to reflect after practicing.
We kicked off the fall with a bang with another popular topic of the year, entrepreneurship in music. That has become a buzzword in 2016 for sure. I decided to throw in my 2 cents with a week of content from 5 people that are really killing it, in my opinion, in this arena. We start off with Emilio Guarino. Here he is talking about thoughts on mindset and threads he's seen in the audition winners that I've interviewed.
Keeping the right mindset and keeping a positive attitude is so important. And like, if you talk to people or listen to your many podcasts about people who have won big auditions, they're all like that. That's one common thread I see with all of them is they play the auditions and they're like, okay, I didn't get this one. What's the problem? Like, what do I got to do? They see it as like a problem solving thing, not like, oh, I must be terrible. That's clearly what's happening here.
Here's Danny Zeman on the power of teaching the very first lesson.
When you hand an instrument to somebody for the first time and you have the ability to influence exactly how they learn things and how they understand, and it's like learning manners for the first time in kindergarten or preschool, like that sets you up for the rest of your life.
Here's Peter Seymour, another round 2 guest, with the best advice he could give any young player.
The best advice is, if you want to play music, is to practice unbelievably hard and just to be as great as the instrument as you can be. And that's why I wouldn't change too much, except I would have even worked harder.
And we finished out Entrepreneur Week with Hugh Sung of A Musical Life. Hugh's been such a great help to me getting this whole thing going again. And Hugh's talking about the richness that learning the piano brought to one of his amateur students.
If I may say this, she's an ordinary, everyday person, never musically trained, never played the piano. But to be able to experience the joy of having something so beautiful as part of you in her life, that was the greatest gift she gave to herself.
Another legendary name in the bass world, Diana Gannett. I got the chance to be on faculty with her at the Golden Gate Bass Camp this summer. Of course, I had to do an interview with her, an interview just filled with takeaways. And here she is talking about mapping out emotions in music by writing them into the music. This is something that she got from Gary Carr, and Gary was another big topic on this year's set of podcasts.
Well, that's again something I got from Gary, and I worked in his library a lot when I was working with him, and you'd find it in his manuscripts. He'd write the emotion for each section or phrase or anything that seemed salient to him. He would write the emotion in. He also wrote in a lot of note names. I love to tell students, I said, well, Gary writes in note names. If that helps you, write it in. And you keep making a mistake, just take the pencil and write something in that'll help you.
Here is Hans Sturm, a round 2 for sure, although the first time was a set of videos with him teaching me the Rabath technique. So, fittingly enough, this clip is him talking about his motivations behind creating the art of the bow and the art of the left hand while he was working with Francois.
There's some things here that if you're just looking at the books, you're not getting. And there should be something that should be out there because, to be able to afford to go to Paris to have a lesson, it's prohibitively expensive. And he's only one guy. And even if you go there and you have a lesson, he will teach you where you are, but that's not necessarily where you dream to be. And you know what I mean? It's like we need something. We need to create something. And it's for selfish reasons, because I was really interested in how does it work.
Next up, Nina DeCesar talking about taking breaks and how she uses this technique to avoid injuries.
I usually take breaks probably every 20 minutes. I'll take a 10-minute break, or sometimes I'll practice half an hour in the morning and then half an hour, 2 hours later, half an hour at night. The most helpful thing while practicing, even more so than breaks, is when something isn't going well to just, actually stop playing for 30 seconds and think about it versus just, powering through it.
Corey Brown of NoTrouble.com, one of the most popular sites for basses on the internet, and an entrepreneur in his own right for sure, talking about the opportunity of being first in something.
What I learned a long time ago was if you're going to do something on the web or anywhere, if you have the chance to be number one, and there's no guarantee, but if you have the chance to be number one, that's an opportunity.
Next up, Craig Butterfield. What an awesome player. What a great guy. Talking about when he first discovered Victor Wooten and wondering how, if YouTube had been around, how much easier it would have been to learn all of this stuff.
I remember sitting there for
hours with the cassette trying to figure out, like, I didn't understand the double thumb thing. I didn't know that's what he was doing. And so I was trying to replicate these sounds, but I didn't understand the basic technique. And so I wonder now if you know, because now you go on YouTube and there's like 80,000 instructional videos on how to do the Victor Wooten stuff, you know, not that he has one thing. Of course, he's an incredible musician, but, you know, if you're talking about specifically the double thumb thing, there's lots of videos about how to do that. And if that was around when I was younger, maybe I would have stuck with electric or something.
We kick off October with another legend, Frank Proto, who I got a chance to meet in Prague. I had interviewed him right before going to Prague. This got published right after getting back from Prague, and he's talking about his lesson slot with Fred Zimmerman, which happened to be directly after Charles Mingus.
You know who came for his lesson just before me every week was Mingus.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, and here's a good Mingus story. You know, we'd say hello to each other and, you know, kind of nod, and that was about it. But one day I show up for my lesson, and on the music stand, there's a piece of music that I had never seen before. It was a hand-copied manuscript, and it said bass solo, and it was in treble clef, and this was extremely unusual. I don't know if I ever saw anything in treble clef at that point of my musical life. So Mr. Z came in, and I said, "What's this?" So he says, "Oh, Charlie wrote himself something that he can't play." And he asked me to come to a recording session to play it, and you know, he left it for me to practice.
Next up, Shinji Ashima, an old friend of Frank's from Juilliard, and my first live interview here in San Francisco. He's a great composer and a member of the San Francisco Opera and Ballet, and he is talking about finding out that he'd gotten a commission to write a ballet for the San Francisco Ballet, but it needed to be done in 3 months, and it was right before a big boat trip.
I found out about this in June, and the trip was in July. And I have a horrible fear of sailing, frankly. But the fear of writing a piece for full orchestra for the first time, especially for all my colleagues who are going to judge this.
Yeah.
In one sense, it's my ultimate dream, sure. But it was also the scariest thing. And so I went on the sailing trip with one friend and again, 6 gorgeous models. As it turns out, it was so bizarre. And I went, and my thought was, well, if I drown in the Greek islands, at least I won't have to write this score. I'll have an excuse, right?
Next up, Sandra Ostland of Baylor University, another Paul and Francois student, talking about both Paul and Francois.
You know, my models with Paul and Francois, because you go and see them, something's new. They figured something new out. They developed something. They've made something easier so that, you know, not only are they masters, but they're eternal students. So those are the sort of role models that you want to have.
So many interviews from this point forward were based on meetings in Prague, conversations in Prague, even though my next guest, Trevor Davis, is an American. I'd never met him until going to Prague. So got him on the phone after we got back. Here he is talking about how much crazier the luthier trade ended up being than he expected.
And this was a kind of a crazy thing because it was kind of like, oh, well, here I'm going to go do something legitimate. And, little did I know, like, when I get there, like, everybody's joking about how illegitimate it is. And, there's a lot of people just going there to, like, party. And there were a lot of people who weren't. There were a lot of people who were very serious about it. A lot of people just confused, didn't know which direction they wanted to go in. And I was like, well, man, I'm here because I need to make a career out of this. I need to actually get a job doing this. And it was definitely motivation, especially, when you wake up every morning with your wife at 3 a.m. so she can go work at a call center for a credit card company.
Next, we had Seth Haynes, author of Break Into the Scene. Here he is talking about freelancing, which is the topic of his book, and how frequently people don't respond to messages.
Anybody that's ever done contracting work knows it can be such a pain when you reach out to people and they don't respond for a week, or you can't find people, or they never respond at all. But if you reach out to them and say, hey, I can't do the gig, but here are 5 people, you're saving them the time. If they're really looking for a person and you help them find someone, they will absolutely remember you.
Rob Knopper of Audition Hacker, talks about how he sees auditioning for orchestras as a totally viable career path.
The concept of it's impossible to win an orchestra audition, I just totally disagree with that. I think that there are a lot of reasons why it's a viable career path. It's a career path that I planned on having, and it's a career path that I followed. And I know that not everybody can have success with it, but for those people who really, really, really want it, there is a path to success there.
Next up, another one of my friends here in San Francisco, Alan Santos, describing what exactly it is that he does for people in his role as a life coach.
How about I tell you like this and we can dive in a little bit more?
Sure.
So if you imagine just a blank sheet of paper and there's an X on it, and that's where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you come to me because there's something you want in your life, or there's something you're stuck on, or an idea that you have that you just can't really figure out what it is yet. We take a look at that and we just start to map it out. We plot a route for you. So we also look at what might get in the way. So maybe there's a hill here, or maybe there's a river here, obstacle of some sort. Maybe it's someplace you've never even been. So we have to give you tools to sort of carve that path out for yourself.
Next, we had Jonathan Haskell. Here he is talking about communicating effectively as a conductor. And a note for this, the context of this clip, Jonathan's orchestra speaks French primarily.
Communication without words. It's easy to talk. It's easy to start explaining things. All right, the fourth cardinal sin: talking too much. You can tell a whole story. First of all, they're talking in English, so not everyone's going to understand. And even if it were in French, people would tune out immediately, unless it's a really good joke. Good joke. There's no problem with that. Too many jokes, people don't like that either. It's hard to win.
Another big name in the world of bass, and someone I got the chance to meet in person for the first time in Prague, David Hayes, talking about his unbridled love of the bass.
But I love it. I absolutely love the bass. I love everything about it. And from the time I get up to the time I go to bed, I'm really a bass nut. I absolutely love it.
Simone Marciniak, another fabulous player that I met for the first time in Prague, talking about his Labrie N-Pin and, fittingly, Rabath and Paul Ellison.
Well, that came with my inspiration with Francois Rabat, of course. It took me a while to install it because I play a German bow, and I was asking myself, is this actually working with the German bow because it's different arm angle and everything? And then I talked to Paul Ellison, in fact, and so he actually told me how to put it because I have my end pin is kind of moved to the left a little bit, towards the G string side. So the bass is balanced in a little bit different way. I just experimented with it.
Garrett Hope, another podcaster, and that was another theme with interviewing fellow podcasters. Garrett does the Portfolio Composer. We had a great, no holds barred, no editing interview, tons of fun. And he's talking about this, the baby boomers are all about to retire line that I've also heard for years, and the untruth of this. Here's Garrett.
I remember starting my master's degree, and this was in 2003. And my professors literally said to me, they said, Garrett, all these baby boomers are going to be turning 60 in the next 10 years, and they're all going to retire, and there's going to be this huge vacuum of positions. So going to school right now, you're in the right time, the right place. There's going to be this need. Yeah. And you know what happens, right? Yeah. Right when I start my doctorate in 2008, the economy tanks.
Yep.
So these baby boomers stay in their jobs.
Next up, my second week focusing on teaching, even deeper this time. We kick it off with Johnny Hamill. And another major topic, time and time again this year, was George Vance. Ira Gold, Galen McCormick, Nina DeCesar. So many people talked about George. And here's Johnny talking about how George focused on Scotland's Burning as a warm-up piece. It's a great clip about why we warm up.
So what I usually do is I do the same thing. George was pretty adamant about saying that instead of Twinkle, it's Scotland's Burning because it's two open strings at the beginning of the song. So you get string crossings and resonance. And then once you start pushing the left hand down, it sometimes stops the resonance from the bow. so I always have them play Scotland's Burning to warm up. And I usually look at them and I say, hey, a baseball player is going to go over on deck circle and swing that bat. You know, why is he swinging the bat? You don't think he knows how to swing the bat by now? You know, like you got to warm up the most important thing to make the performance better.
Next, we had Cornelia Watkins about the most important trait in a private teacher.
Probably the most important thing is to see the big picture. If you just do it one lesson at a time, you know, you might teach some good lessons. I mean, I did it for years. I mean, I shouldn't talk like I've never been in that boat, because that's what a lot of us do. You know, we get out of college and we need to get a little money and we teach private lessons, right? And it's kind of week to week. And, oh, yeah, here's this kid. Oh, yeah, what was he working on? But if you really want to be serious about teaching, you see the bigger picture. If you've got a kid who's serious about bass playing, let's say, and he comes to you sixth grader or something like that, you really want to be able to step back and see some kind of trajectory over the next 6 years maybe. Where are they going to be in 6 years?
Here's Dennis Bergevin on how he almost became a cop.
So I actually stopped playing the bass. I quit orchestra in my senior year, didn't play, and I was going into college thinking, what am I doing, you know? And at first I was like, okay, I think I'm going to become a police officer. And so I actually enrolled at a SUNY college near where I lived and took some general courses with the thought, you know, okay. And I got into running at that time too, like real into it. And I thought, well, this is the way I'm going to go. And it lasted about a semester.
Alex Ritter describes the differences between people in Brazil and people in the United States and what the move to the U.S. was like for him as he entered his undergrad.
It's really important for people to have their distance. And, you know, I'm from Brazil. I like to talk. I like to interact and all that. And we like to touch and hug and all that. I was 19 years old. So I remember that being tough, not having that same type of interaction that I used to have in Brazil.
Next, we have George Amorim about how being your worst critic can actually be an asset.
Being your worst critic is your biggest help. Like, before things come out of your mouth and there's no way to bring them back. So if you have this constant assessment, fixing, and execution, fixing, execution, you do that, it doesn't take long for it to become like a split-second process.
As we get further into November at this point here, Ruben Rogers, our most shared episode of 2016. Here's Ruben talking about the challenge of playing on other people's instruments.
When you're not a traveling musician, you play your own instrument most of the time, which is great. And I've had the luxury of traveling my instrument and playing with mostly people who are like, okay, if you get charged, I'll pay for it, you know. But also I realized over the years of me being kind of spoiled, even to this point, that I say my proficiency, or at least in my head, to play other people's instruments was way lower.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You know?
Right.
You know? Yeah. Even though if I had it in my hands, I didn't have it in my head.
Young Xiao Wei, who I haven't seen for years and years, teaches at Louisiana State University. Such a great interview with her. And this is a clip about how her practicing has become more analytical over time.
I mean, I always, trying to think a lot when I practice, but I read a lot more, think a lot more, and I have to find and analyze the way I play. So the process of teaching, I analyze the way of my playing, and I incorporate that into my own practice schedule as well.
Another thematic week as we near the end of November were Memories from Prague. We start off with Petya Bagovska talking through her studio setup in Sofia, Bulgaria.
The musicians who are they are doing their diplomas in the high school. Some of them are going abroad. Some of them are just staying in Sofia in the Academy of Music. I have a big class with students. Usually it is around 8 to 10 students. Okay. Yeah. And we have good tradition. Usually I'm teaching 3 days, like full classes through the days. And also they are studying chamber music, orchestra music, all this musical discipline, but it is specified absolutely like Academy of Music, or what they say in German, Hochschule.
Another episode from Prague, Florian Pertzborn, talking through the educational system in Portugal.
We have mainly three systems about music education. There's one, the conservatoire system is kind of in the middle, it's a secondary education system. Then we have the university level, which is superior school of music or university or polytechnic system. And then we have a professional school education. That means the kids come and they have lessons, normal lessons, and they learn instruments. And they start with the age of 9 to have this the first. And they can learn instruments within the school system.
And Rob Anzalotti of Bass Capos. I spoke with him and Chris Mathers, and here's Rob talking through the angle at which his bass capos close.
Yeah, if it just turned, because it comes from the side of the string.
Right.
So it's got to also come from above. Otherwise, it'll only just push the string aside. Yeah.
Sure.
And so, something that the only person to do that I know of, that it's angled forward, so it's coming down at a slope as it gets to the string, but the shaft is also threading down into the bracket. Yeah. So it's going down that way too. Okay. I don't know how much that affects the entire, the entire process, but it does a little bit. It moves probably a half a millimeter down because of that.
Next, we had another round 2 and the first interview that I put out from my trip to Los Angeles in November. This is David Allen Moore of LA Phil and University of Southern California talking about finger spans.
This is like the driest, most technical podcast ever. Like talking about notes and fingers on strings. But if you start with the G and the D in thumb position, on the G string, you have the span of a fifth between that. And then if you replace that distance, so you go from the D and you have that same distance going up, that's now an octave. Sure. And so it's like, okay, cool. That's how can I use that? So I went down. It's like, well, if you go down, the span from the D to the G is a fourth. And then if you go down again, the span from the D to the B flat is a major third. And then if you go to the open string to the B flat, that's a minor third. But all those distances are the same span. It's all exactly the same span.
Next, we had Dave Swift of the Jules Holland Band, probably the most famous bass player in the United Kingdom. Great interview, great stories. And here's Dave talking about Anthony Jackson and being impressed versus being moved by somebody's playing.
But I think Anthony's mostly self-taught, as far as I tell. And to me, he's probably my favourite living bass guitarist. Way more than a lot of the guys that went to loads of colleges and did degrees. And again, I'm not taking away from them; they're still phenomenal players. But do they impress me? Sure. Do they move me?
Another big name from the UK, Scott Devine of Scott's Bass Lessons, and how wearing gloves helped with his focal dystonia.
That was the answer. That was the key for me. It didn't completely cure my condition at all. I suffer from it every day, like typing and stuff. Sometimes it's so bad. I know people can't see this, but I'm just going to grab 2 pens. I actually type using 2 pens sometimes, one in each hand instead of using my fingers, because the more I type, the worse it gets. So I've essentially got a threshold. And if I play a lot, if I did sort of like 4 gigs in a week, I'd be in danger of it getting worse. But the threshold it is at the minute, I can manage it.
Back into the world of jazz with Ben Allison. Here's Ben talking about the idea of crowdsourcing a project.
The idea of crowdsourcing a project and connecting directly to the people who are really interested in this, and it's been incredible to find people who some people just pre-order the record, and then there are other people who jump in on kind of higher levels and really want to engage in my process and want to know more about how the record is made.
Another uber geeky deep dive with Bill Merchant, luthier extraordinaire, talking about when to swap out posts.
I remember one year, it was 80 degrees in March. I still didn't put in any summer posts until June. Because wood gains moisture slowly, it's just never until June. So these days for me, it's winter post in January, it's summer post in June, right after Memorial Day. And people don't realize when they have too short a post in, the sins aren't anywhere near as apparent, although they still like the bass better when they get the right length. And also because it takes place over time, it's not as noticeable.
Another episode from my LA trip with LA Phil principal bassist Chris Hanulek. Here he is talking about musicality and technique.
And I will admit, it's easier said than done. But you can't divorce the two from each other.
Yeah.
And I think when you do, you start getting into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You start getting into trouble because you're not making music. You're not incorporating it into everything that you do.
Another audition-themed episode with Caleb Quillen, the latest addition to the Kansas City Symphony, talking about how running helped with his audition process.
It's been said before, I ran and I still run a lot, almost every day. And I think for me, because I have a lot of energy that I just have to get out.
Yeah.
Especially days before the audition. So I was running almost every day up until the audition, and running both mornings of the audition that I was doing. And I found that just so good for focus and great for, if you feel well, you're going to play better. And it just got rid of some of that extra energy that I didn't need.
We round out 2016 with 2 episodes from new podcasters. One relatively new, one much newer. This is a clip from James Newcomb of the Musicpreneur podcast, talking about being overly labor intensive on podcast production. Something I can understand.
When I started this show, it was so labor intensive. I would, I don't know if you heard like the first 20 or so episodes, but I would do 3 interviews per episode, right? And then I would have music, different music, every single episode, different opening music. The music had nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
And it was so time intensive. I put so much time into editing. And I finally realized, you know what, people, they just want something real.
And we finish off with Tracy Friedlander of Crushing Classical and her goals for her podcast and what she hopes listeners will get out of listening to her guests.
If it's somehow inspiring and that conversation leads them somewhere where they can say, maybe I would like to do that for myself. Maybe I would like to create a career for myself in a different way, then I would be thrilled if I could provide that.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this look back at 2016. I love doing this sort of thing. I'm a reflective guy. I love to look back and think and see where we are, where we've been, where we're going. That's what this episode was to me. I am so excited for 2017 and what that year is going to bring and what the rest of the upcoming years are going to bring for the podcast, for all of you. I'm so appreciative of all of you listening to this podcast. It just means so much to me. Thank you so much for writing in. Feedback at contrabassconversations.com. Check out the website and our 10 years of episodes. Check out our 10-year anniversary episode coming up just in a couple days here. And I'm just so glad to say my catchphrase for the last time in 2016. We will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.